Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Werfel, I want to start out with an issue which my colleague Senator Wyden raised in his introductory remarks, where we do have a big disagreement, namely whether the IRS should be the entity that prepares people's taxes for them. Some want the IRS to prepare tax returns for taxpayers, and several colleagues have actually introduced legislation in Congress to authorize the IRS to do that. The IRA gave the IRS $15 million to study such an outcome. That idea is concerning, and not just because of the apparent bias in favor of doing so by those who were selected to conduct this study, but for a lot of other reasons. Having the IRS act as tax preparer, tax collector, and tax enforcer raises significant conflicts of interest in many of our minds. It would incur billions of dollars of cost and development and would expose exponentially more taxpayer information to misuse or abuse. The private industry, the private sector of this country already prepares and files free tax returns for tens of millions of Americans. And millions more of Americans are already eligible for that. The IRS's strategic plan has an entire initiative devoted to an IRS-run tax preparation program, which seems to me odd because it's still being studied right now. And the question I have for you is, has the IRS made the determination that it is going to pursue this? And if so, where does the IRS find its statutory authorization to do so, or the funding allocated and appropriated to do so?
Senator, no decision has been made on moving forward with a direct file solution, and in large measure because of the point you raised. The Inflation Reduction Act mandated that the IRS produce a study for this committee and for Congress on the feasibility of such a solution. That study is due in mid-May. We're on track to complete that study. I don't want to jump ahead of the conclusion because the study's not done yet. And so we're still working through. And what we plan to produce will hopefully create an important dialogue between the IRS, the administration, and this committee on what the study says and whether it is feasible or not and what the various issues are. Because you've raised some questions, and hopefully the study will help us have a good dialogue on those questions.
Well, can we agree that, I'm glad to hear your answer, that it's not a predetermined outcome already. And can we agree that the decision is one that Congress can make, not the IRS independently?
I'm not sure of where the legal authorities are. I think it's a good question to ask in the context of issuing the report. The report really focuses on operationally what it would take to produce such a solution. Your question in terms of who has the legal authority is something I'm not sure is within the scope of the report, but is clearly an important question to ask on any go-forward plan.
Well, I would tell you that I encourage you to recognize that Congress has the authority to make this determination. Let me move on. My time is running out. Senator Wyden also asked you about the tax gap. Have you done an analysis, or has the IRS done any kind of an in-depth analysis you can show us as to where the tax gap lies? And what I'm referring to is something like what we've seen out of the Joint Tax Committee that goes by income increment or cohort. Where is the tax gap? That whether we can decide on what the amount of that tax gap is, where is the tax gap among people who live in the United States or who are taxpayers?
Yeah, we released our latest tax gap assessment in October of 2022. It covers years 2014 to 16. I don't think we have time to unpack all of the rich content in there. I will say that it does give us a good roadmap for where to assess where there's a difference between the balance owed and the balance paid. One of the things that's important to understand is we're constantly trying to improve the way we measure the tax gap. And when I was answering Chairman Wyden's question, when we have better capacity to assess, for example, high-income taxpayers, individuals, large corporations, and complex partnerships, we will learn more about how those financial structures are laid out and be able to hone more detail in terms of what the tax gap is in those areas.
Well, thank you. And my time's running. I want to ask my last question.
Please.
So I was very interested in your, again, making the pledge that you will not increase taxes on those audits on those making less than $400,000. As you've likely gathered from my opening statement, I'm concerned that the strategic plan did nothing to flesh out the details of this. And I don't have time for you to get into it today, but we know even less about what the IRS believes will happen to actual audit numbers for taxpayers making less than $400,000 than we did before. There is some kind of a historical rate that's being referenced. There is a pledge now, and a pledge from both Secretary Yellen and you, but we need to get details as to exactly how this pledge will be honored as we move forward.
Yes, sir. I'm prepared to provide additional details, maybe in additional questions that are coming up. I know we have a member meeting with me tomorrow. Of course, I understand that there's a request for more details, and I think the plan that was issued is robust. As you said, it's dense. Does it answer every question? No, and that's because we want to work with you to figure out what the questions are that we need to answer to make sure that what we're doing is very clear in terms of how we're going to improve the IRS.